This is my true story. My son and his wife told me to move into the garage, the house I had built with my own hands, brick by brick, board by board, 20 years ago. They said it was for convenience, but I knew what they really meant. That night, I carried a pillow, an old leather jacket, and the last photo of my late wife and quietly walked down the stairs. From upstairs came music, laughter. Madison's voice, he looked so pitiful. They thought they were humiliating me, turning a father into a burden, a builder into an afterthought. But there was one thing they didn't know: the house they thought was theirs still bore my name on every piece of paper. Dinner that evening was silent. The yellow light hung over the wooden table, glinting off cold meat and untouched silverware. The sound of cutlery scraping the plates was louder than breathing. Ethan sat across from me, his white shirt, crisp eyes calculating, as if rehearsing the sentence he was about to deliver. Then he put down his fork. His voice came out calm, almost gentle, but cold. "Dad, maybe you should move into the garage for a while. We need more space upstairs." Madison didn't look up. She smiled faintly, brushed her hair aside. That smile had a trace of mockery in it. I set my glass down and looked at the boy who used to run to me on job sites, calling me a hero. Ethan didn't flinch. His eyes were steady, reflective, like glass, and just as cold. I asked only one question. "Are you serious?" He nodded, still composed. "You need peace and quiet, Dad. The garage is big. We'll clean it up for you." Madison added softly, almost kindly. "We can bring down a space heater, too." No one said another word. No one needed to. I stood up. The chair scraped against the floor, sharp and dry. Madison turned away to gather the dishes, the sound of running water filling the silence. Ethan looked down at his phone. In my room, I took out a small suitcase. Inside were a few folded shirts, that old leather jacket with worn elbows, a rusted hammer, and the framed photo of Ellen. It was taken the day we finished building this house. June sunlight brushed across her cheek, her hand on my shoulder. That look of quiet pride only a wife gives when she knows you've built something that will outlast both of you. I looked at it for a long time before placing it carefully inside. The garage sat at the end of the hall. With every step down, the air grew colder. From above came laughter and clinking glasses. Madison's voice floated down again, bright and cruel. "He looks so pitiful." I stopped for a second, then kept walking. The door creaked open. The smell of gasoline and dust rushed up to meet me. A single yellow bulb flickered overhead, spreading thin light over the concrete floor. One corner was stacked with old toolboxes, another held the workbench I'd built when we were first finishing the windows. I laid the blanket over a folding chair, placed Ellen's photo beside the radio. When I sat down, the metal legs groaned beneath me. The wall was cold against my back. From above, laughter poured through the ceiling. Then music, the tinny rhythm of a tick-tock clip looping over and over. Madison's voice again teasing too loud. Then Ethan's. The sound of a phone camera starting. Boomer sleeping in the garage. Their laughter followed, sharp, echoing, each one landing like the swing of a hammer. I didn't move. I didn't speak. The light flickered above me, trembling. Every laugh sounded like another door closing, another piece of the home I built being taken away. Sometime past midnight, my phone buzzed. A message from Nancy Lopez, my neighbor across the street. "Mr. Pierce, have you seen this video?" I opened the link. A short clip, maybe 10 seconds. Shot from the top of the stairs. The camera caught me sitting in the yellow glow, head down still. Madison's laughter filled the frame. Ethan stood beside her, arms crossed. The caption read, "Boomer sleeping in the garage." 200,000 views. 3,000 comments. I put the phone down on the table. The night air seeped in through the crack in the door, stirring an old newspaper on the floor. I looked at Ellen's photo again. She used to tell me this house was the most beautiful thing I'd ever built. I never imagined it would become the place where I'd be humiliated. I opened the old toolbox. Beneath a tangle of rusted pliers and bent nails was a fireproof envelope. Inside the original trust deed, the notarized copy of the Pierce Living Trust. My name still clear in ink, the seal still pressed firm. I remembered the day I signed it, my hand trembling not from fear, but from pride. I did it so my son would always have a home, so he'd never start life with nothing the way I once did. And now that same son had told me to leave the very home I had guaranteed for him. I spread the paper out on the table, ran my fingers over the embossed stamp. The name was still mine, not his. Above me, laughter again. Madison talking loudly on the phone about view counts, brand deals, local buzz. Her voice sparkled with excitement the way only ignorance can. I leaned back, breathing slow. The air smelled of oil metal and something colder, maybe the beginning of distance. I closed my eyes as the garage door rattled shut. Darkness settled like a curtain. I felt no rage, no bitterness, only a stillness so sharp it could cut glass. For the first time I understood the house I built, with my hands no longer belonged to me. It belonged to the silence that followed. Morning came with the chill that follows a long Carolina rain. The wind slipped through the cracks in the garage wall, carrying the smell of wet grass and rust. I opened my eyes. Pale light filtered through the gap under the steel door, casting thin bars across the oil-stained concrete. Outside, cars hummed faintly, the slow heartbeat of a city that had long forgotten my name. I sat up, my back against the wall, breathing in the metallic air. That smell of iron dust and old effort pulled me backward 20 years to a raw patch of land outside Austin when this house was still just a dream drawn on Ellen's lined paper. It was 2003. I was 42. Ellen had just gotten a teaching job at a middle school in South Austin. Every weekend we drove out to this plot of dirt and built our future by hand. I was the contractor, the laborer, and sometimes both at once. Ellen drew the plans. I dug the footings. Ethan was 14, all knees and elbows, a boy still growing into his voice, but he followed me everywhere. I remember his sneakers caked with mud, leaving small prints across the fresh concrete. He asked me once, his voice half wonder, half challenge, "How long do you think this house will stand?" "Dad," I told him. "Long enough for your children to ask the same question." July sunlight back then burned like copper. I taught him how to draw a straight line, how to drive a nail without bending it. When he did it right, Ellen would come out with lemonade, her smile proud, calling us her two men of the house. I can still see her face the morning the foundation set, the quiet faith in her eyes, the kind that believes happiness can be built with two good hands. By summer of 2004, the house stood finished. Not grand, but solid, a 2-story cedar home with a wide porch facing the lake. We painted every wall ourselves, stapled the insulation, sanded the floors. Ethan hung a crooked wooden sign on the porch that read, "Pierce Home Forever Strong." Ellen called it the legacy of labor. And I believed her. Years moved faster than I did. By 2010, Ellen convinced me to set up a revocable living trust. She said it was protection, a way to keep the house in the family, to make sure Ethan would never be without roots. I agreed, but kept ownership in my name. The house would pass to him only after I was gone. The papers were notarized, sealed, tucked into the bottom drawer of our oak cabinet. Ellen said it wasn't just a house, it was a promise. And I believed her. Then in 2018, Ellen's heart gave out on a winter morning. The house didn't change, but everything inside it turned hollow. I remember the morning after the funeral. Ethan came early holding 2 coffees. He sat across from me in the living room, voice even polite. "Dad, maybe you should transfer the deed now. It'll make the paperwork easier later." I looked at him for a long time, holding Ellen's picture in both hands. "I'm not ready to disappear," I said. He didn't argue. Just shrugged, set his coffee down, and left. After that, I lived quietly. I kept the garden trimmed, repainted the porch, oiled the hinges. I told myself he'd come around, that one day he'd see this house the way we built it, as a place of memory, not possession. Then he brought Madison home. Madison understood social media better than she understood people. She spoke softly, smiled on cue, always knew where to stand when a camera was on. Ethan was drawn to that glow, the quick kind of fame that makes you forget where you came from. They married fast, moved into the house a month later. I was happy at first. I wanted them to have the warmth Ellen and I once had. But soon, their laughter filled every silence. They rearranged the living room, replaced Ellen's furniture, repainted the porch, took down the Pierce home sign. Said it looked too old-fashioned for their new style. I didn't argue. Maybe youth needs to feel like it's making something new, even when it's only repainting the past. Still, each time I walked through those rooms, I felt more like a guest than a father. The house still carried my name, but I was just a tenant in its shadow. The sound of laughter drifted from upstairs, pulling me back to the present. Ethan's voice, light and careless, talking over the clatter of breakfast. Madison's laughter followed, sweet and sharp at once. I caught my own name between their words, then the quick sound of amusement that came after. I didn't need to hear the rest to understand. I stood, walked to the tool chest. Inside was the same fireproof envelope, the deed, the trust papers, the notarized signatures. I laid them out on the workbench. Morning light brushed across the ink of my name, still dark and steady. Ellen once told me my handwriting looked like it belonged to a man who believed in what he built. I could almost hear her voice again. "If one day your son forgets who laid the first stone, this paper will remember." I put the papers back, stepped outside. Mist hung low over the yard. The lake beyond the trees shimmered faintly with the first touch of sun. Ethan came out the front door in a tailored suit, keys in hand. Madison followed, kissed his cheek, said something that made them both laugh. I stood beneath the oak by the driveway, unseen. For a fleeting second, I saw the 14-year-old boy he used to be, the one who ran barefoot through the mud, who looked up at me with faith that building something with your hands meant it would last forever. That boy was gone now, buried under ambition and noise. I went back inside the garage and opened the old photograph, me, Ellen, and Ethan standing on the freshly poured foundation, the morning sun bright enough to make us squint. I touched the image gently. In my mind, Ellen's voice whispered again, "Don't let anyone break the foundation, Har." I nodded, eyes fixed on the stairs above where laughter echoed once more. The boy who once trusted my hands had forgotten whose hands built the life he stands on. That night, the kitchen glowed the way it always did, too bright, too clean, too staged for real warmth. The smell of roasted meat and sauce hung heavy in the air. Madison had her phone propped against a vase, filming a family dinner vlog for her channel. I sat near the edge of the table, careful to stay out of frame. Ethan talked about a new deal, a luxury property near Charlotte, some wealthy client who wanted a vacation home by the lake. His tone carried that easy confidence of a man who thought success could erase where he came from. Madison chimed in, her voice light, excited. Her new ad had hit 50,000 views in one afternoon. If her channel reached 100,000 followers this week, the furniture brand would sign a full contract. She said it like she was announcing a birth. I listened, but my mind was elsewhere. The food in front of me was cooling fast, steam fading into nothing. The light above us was too sharp, throwing every reflection across the table, every smile, every movement rehearsed for the camera. I picked at my vegetables, chewing slowly, trying to keep the peace. But when Ethan started talking about buying another car, the words slipped out before I could stop them. Maybe hold off a bit, son. Interest rates are climbing. No need to spend more than you have to. Madison looked up. Her dark eyes locked on me, her smile polite but hard. At your age, people usually retire and enjoy themselves, she said, soft but cutting. Don't worry about our finances. Ethan laughed, leaned back and added, This is our house, Dad. You're just living here with us. The words landed like a needle in the chest, small but deep. I didn't respond. I just stared at my plate, the gravy pooling beside the bread. Somewhere inside, Ellen's voice echoed steady and calm. This house is the work of your life. Don't let anyone tear down its foundation. I swallowed slowly. The salt on my tongue wasn't just from the food. Emily sat beside me, 9 years old, blonde hair falling over her shoulders, eyes the same blue as Ellen's. She looked around the table, confused, then asked in her small, clear voice, Grandpa, why don't you sit at the head of the table like Dad does? The room froze. Ethan's smile faltered. Madison pressed her lips together, pretending to adjust her camera. I turned to Emily and smiled gentle, not saying a word. The silence was sharp enough to hear the hum of the refrigerator. I set my chopsticks down. The sound of them hitting the plate felt louder than it should have. Ethan cleared his throat, changed the subject, his voice returning to that cheerful rhythm. Madison laughed on cue. Their glasses clinked. Emily kept watching me, her eyes wide, unblinking. She didn't understand what had happened, but she felt it. Children always do. I drew in a slow breath. The smell of food, once comforting, now made my stomach tighten. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping across the wooden floor. Madison glanced up, startled for a second, then went back to her conversation. Ethan didn't even pause. I stood, my voice even. I'm done. Dinner was good. No one answered. Only Emily spoke quietly. Grandpa, you forgot your napkin. I turned, smiled. Keep it, sweetheart. I walked out, the kitchen light stretching behind me like a stage I no longer belonged to. Their voices rose again, laughter, talk of contracts, the steady rhythm of a life I'd once thought would always include me. Down the hall, Ellen's old photograph still hung on the wall. The frame was chipped, the paint peeling. The light caught her eyes, just so the same soft look she'd give me when I came home late from work. I stopped for a moment, then kept walking down the stairs. The garage air hit me cool, damp, smelling faintly of oil and rain. I sat down on the folding chair. Above me, their footsteps crossed the floorboards. The scrape of chairs, the clatter of cabinets. Then Madison's laugh again, bright and careless. Ethan's voice followed, lower, content. Then laughter once more. I looked up at the ceiling, the light seeping through the cracks like a faded gold veil. I tried to remember the early years' dinners when there were only 3 chairs filled. Me, Ellen, and a boy who believed everything his father built would last forever. Ellen always sat across from me, Ethan on my right. The head of the table was left empty, because she said that seat was for guests, for the future, for the children our children would have. That chair is still there. Only now, the man who built the table has no place at it. I lowered my head, my chest tight. The dim light above cast a faint reflection of the empty chair onto the concrete floor. Outside, the wind moved through the porch, whispering like Ellen's breath in the dark corners of my memory. My hands trembled, not from the cold, but from something older, something rising again that I'd buried with her. I closed my eyes, and let the sound of their laughter drift down, mixing with the wind. This house was built on the foundation I poured with my sweat and her love. It still stands, yes, but somewhere beneath it, something vital has cracked. Above me, Madison's laughter rang again, bright and victorious. I opened my eyes, staring into the dim ceiling, the dust floating through the air like slow snow. And in that suspended silence, I understood I no longer had a seat in the home I built with my own hands. Sunday morning. Madison's voice carried down from upstairs, bright and electric. "Dad, your garage video is trending." I opened my eyes. Morning light slipped through the seam of the steel door, scattering across the dust in the air like ash caught in slow motion. I reached for my old phone on the workbench screen, cracked, battery fading, and opened the app. There I was, frozen in the frame, sitting alone in the dim garage, head bowed under a yellow bulb. The caption pulsed at the bottom: "Boomer sleeping in the garage." 200,000 views, thousands of comments. Someone had written, "At least he's got a place to sleep." Another, "Looks like a sitcom scene." And one tagged the local group Carolina Living Laughs, where people posted funny clips about their neighbors. I scrolled through them one by one. I didn't feel anger, just the slow, scraping ache of something hollowing me out from the inside like nails dragged against the walls of my chest. Upstairs, Madison's laughter broke through the floorboards. She was on the phone, voice high, giddy. "They love it, Ethan. It's going viral." He laughed back, proud, like it was their achievement. An hour later, there was a knock at the door. I opened the garage. Nancy Lopez stood outside holding a warm apple pie. The morning wind carried the scent of cinnamon, sweet, gentle, but her eyes were full of apology. "Mr. Pierce, I saw that video. I'm so sorry. I didn't know they'd post something like that." I gave her a small smile. "It's all right, Nancy. Everything's fine." She nodded quietly, set the pie down on the small table, and walked away. Her coat lifted in the breeze as she crossed the street. I watched until she disappeared, then closed the door. I sat down, cut a small slice. The smell was comforting, but it stuck in my throat. Through the narrow garage window, I could see the old brick wall along the side of the house, the first wall Ellen and I ever built. I walked out to it, the pie still warm in my hand. The bricks were rough under my fingers, cracked in places like old skin. The sunlight traced every fracture. I remembered Ellen's voice that day, laughing as she wiped sweat from her forehead. "Bricks can crack hard, but the foundation never let it shake." I stood there a long time. The light made my eyes sting, and somewhere inside, something heavy turned over, a feeling without a name, made of grief and anger in equal parts. Back inside, I passed the hallway, lined with framed photos Madison had staged for brand shoots. White walls, gold fixtures, every surface too polished, too perfect. The living room gleamed, not a thing out of place. And yet the air felt dead, the kind of silence you get in houses built for cameras, not for people. On the dining table sat a mess of papers and magazines. I started to stack them up, old mail bills, when one thick sheet caught my hand. It was a photocopy. Refinance mortgage. Atlantic First Bank logo in the corner. My name written neatly beneath it. Co-signer Harlan Pierce. My heart stumbled. The signature, my signature, looped across the page, familiar and wrong. The tilt of the pen, the long flourish, close enough to fool a stranger. But not me. I could see Ethan's name beside it, and the words secured by existing property. I sat down. The paper trembled in my hand. Ethan's words came back to me. "This is our house, Dad. You're just living here." Now I understood. They weren't just taking my dignity. They were taking the last piece of me that still existed on paper. I opened the drawer. More envelopes. More documents printed from emails, bank statements, application forms, copies of my signature. Every one with my name as co-signer. Every one a lie. $700,000. The exact market value of this house. For a moment I thought the floor shifted beneath me. The sunlight hit the paper in my hand, making the forged ink glow like an open wound. Then Ethan's voice echoed from upstairs. "Madison, have you seen the refinance papers?" she answered lightly. "I left them on the table. Maybe your dad moved them." My grip tightened. I stood there staring at the light bleeding across the paper. I didn't put it back. I took it with me down to the garage, the only room still mine. On the wooden workbench, I spread out the papers, slipped on my reading glasses, and went line by line. Every word confirmed what I already knew, but hadn't wanted to face. They'd forged my name, taken a loan on my house, without a single word to me. I sat for a long time listening. The wind outside pushed against the metal siding, making it groan like distant machinery. Somewhere above I could hear the faint beat of music, Madison's laughter blending with it. I thought of Ellen again, her hands dusty with cement, her voice steady. The foundation must never move. But now even the foundation was cracking. Not from weather, from betrayal. I slid the documents back into the envelope and locked them inside the metal cabinet. Outside sunlight caught the window pane just right, sharp enough to cut. Through the glass I saw their silhouettes crossing the yard, moving in sync, their laughter echoing in the wind. For a moment, the light flared off the window, knife bright. That's when I understood. This was no longer about humiliation. This was war. And I, the man they sent to sleep in the garage, had just found his weapon. Night settled slow like ash drifting through the trees. The wind brushed the porch, dry leaves scraping the siding with the sound of whispered voices. I sat in the garage under the dull yellow light, its weak glow trembling across the grain of the old wooden table. The refinance envelope lay there where I'd left it that morning. Every word on that paper felt carved into the back of my mind. I reached beneath the table and pulled out a small brass key, one I'd kept in my wallet for more than 10 years. In the far corner sat the old safe, heavy silent, its paint darkened by time and touch. I turned the key. The lock clicked open with a hollow sound that seemed to echo in the cold air. Inside was a fireproof packet, still sealed with the yellowed tape Ellen had pressed down herself. I pulled it out. Dust floated into the dim light, falling like slow rain onto the concrete floor. When I opened the envelope, the scent of old paper and ink rose up thick with the smell of years. The lamp caught the first page and made the bold heading gleam, Pierce Living Trust. I placed it gently on the table and straightened my back. My hands trembled as I turned the pages one by one. Each line felt like a voice from another time calling across the years. 2010. Ellen and I had sat together at the lawyer's office. Her hand rested on my shoulder. Her voice soft, certain. "Keep this house with honor, Har, not with blind love." I could still see her signature on the witness line, small, angled, firm. Ellen believed in the law the way some people believe in heaven. I kept reading. My eyes traced the fine print, the legal phrasing that had once seemed tedious. But now it read like scripture. Grantor and trustee Harlan Pierce. Beneficiary Ethan Pierce upon the grantor's passing. And at the bottom of the page, one sentence stood alone, all in capital letters, a quiet thunder from the past. No transfer, refinance, or sale shall be valid without the trustee's written consent. I exhaled. Slowly. It felt like a stone lifting off my chest. Ethan had no claim, no authority, no power to sell, to borrow, to trade. Not without my hand. Everything he'd done, the forged refinance, the lies, were empty without me. I sat still, listening to the old clock tick somewhere in the house, each sound a slow heartbeat of the home itself. I thought of that day again, the lawyer reading the final clause, Ellen smiling beside me. "If the day comes when you can't speak, let the paper speak for you," she'd said. "It won't lie. It'll protect what people forget, most fairness." I had believed her, but I'd never imagined I would need to use that paper as a shield against my own son. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the page under the weak light. My shadow stretched long across the wall, thin, weary, almost like another man sitting with me. A sadness welled up deep and wordless. Not anger anymore. Something older. Regret, maybe, for what had been broken long before tonight. Family had once been a roof. Now it was a wall. But even walls, if built right, still stand. I picked up my pen and wrote on the back of the copy, "Confirmed valid." No authorization granted to any party. The ink dried quickly. My handwriting still steady, deliberate, not the shaking hand of an old man. When I capped the pen, I knew the balance had shifted. Tonight I'd taken back what they thought was gone. I placed the papers back in their envelopes, slid them into the safe, and locked it. The click sounded final, not just secure, but sacred. Outside, the wind rustled through the yard. Crickets sang in the dark. For a moment, I could almost feel Ellen near, in the scent of old cedar, in the cold breath of brick and mortar, in the silence she'd always called strength. Near midnight, I still hadn't slept. I made tea, sat by the garage door, where a sliver of light from the kitchen spilled down the stairs. Madison's shadow passed above, phone in hand, laughter sharp. She was talking about remodeling, expanding the kitchen. I smiled faintly. Not bitter this time, just clear. They were planning to renovate what didn't belong to them. The tea burned, going down bitter but alive. In that heat, my thoughts crystallized into something exact. If they could forge my name, I could forge their reckoning. No shouting, no confrontation. Just truth in the right hands. At 3 a.m, I rose, folded the documents carefully, slipped them into my jacket pocket. I knew exactly where I needed to go. Greenville, where Thomas Reynolds still practiced. The lawyer who'd drafted the trust with Ellen 15 years ago. I hadn't spoken to him since her funeral, but men like him, men who live by principle, don't forget what they've signed. By dawn, the sky turned to pewter, streaked with silver mist. I put on my coat, laced up my old boots, and took the keys from the hook. Upstairs, their door remained closed, their world untouched. I walked through the hallway. Ellen's picture hung where it always had. I brushed my fingers against the frame. "I'll keep your promise," I said silently. Outside, the truck started with a low, steady rumble. The neighborhood was still half asleep, streetlights fading one by one. I turned out of the driveway, the house receding in the mirror, its red roof catching the pale light like the dying breath of night. The road to Greenville stretched ahead, straight and endless. 2 hours of highway, 2 hours of thought. My hands stayed firm on the wheel. In my jacket pocket, the envelope felt heavy, not just with paper, but with something living. For the first time in years, I didn't feel tired. The sun rose behind the trees, washing the road in quiet gold. I didn't look back again. Behind me was the house where my dignity was stolen. Ahead was where I'd take it back. Morning stretched a thin silver line across the highway. I drove the old pickup out of Austin while the streetlights still burned amber. Dew clung to the wooden fences, the pastures lay under a pale sheet of fog, and the distant wind turbines turned lazily against the gray. My hands stayed steady on the wheel. In my jacket pocket, the envelope felt as heavy as a brick. Greenville woke slowly, the kind of Texas town that never rushed itself. The bakery and drugstore signs flickered faintly in the half-light. Thomas Reynolds's law office stood on the corner, tin roof, clean windows, a pot of red-blooming cactus by the steps. The receptionist looked up, nodded as if she'd been expecting me. "Mr. Reynolds is waiting. Second door on the left." Inside, the room smelled of waxed wood and freshly printed paper. Morning light slipped through the blinds, laying thin bars of gold across the desk. Thomas rose to greet me, a firm handshake, the kind that came from years of steady work and unspoken responsibility. His eyes were clear, quiet. He gestured for me to sit, then glanced at the envelope in my hand. I spoke only what needed saying. The garage, the video, the humiliation. And finally, the refinance papers, the forged signature. Thomas leaned forward, turning each page like someone reading a story they already knew the ending to. He slipped on his glasses, brought the document close, his finger brushing the ink. "Do you still have the original trust?" he asked. I opened the clasp on the envelope and pulled it free. The words "Pierce Living Trust" caught the light like a reflection on water. Thomas read in silence, eyes tracing every clause. He underlined with a pencil the sentences that mattered most. When he finished, he leaned back, exhaled slowly, and said in that calm, low voice of his, "You're still the legal trustee, Harlan. Without your signature, nothing they've done holds weight. The refinance is void." For a moment it felt like my chest had opened lighter, then heavier again, as if I'd just laid another brick on a foundation. "Then sell it," I said. Thomas paused, fingers interlocked. He studied me for a long second, not as a lawyer, but as a man measuring another's breaking point. "You're sure?" he asked quietly. "That's your son's house." I looked out the window. The sky had begun to lift, brightening over the rooftops. A few sparrows landed on the power lines, shaking off dew. "It's not my house anymore," I said. "And he's not my son." The room went still, enough to hear the pencil roll off the table. Thomas didn't argue. He was the kind of man who knew that real decisions didn't need defending. He opened his planner, speaking with the precision of a carpenter measuring wood. "If we proceed, we'll need an independent appraisal, a title review, full disclosure documents, escrow setup, and a clean closing schedule. It'll take a few weeks." "I can wait," I said. He nodded once. "We'll do this quietly." He made a note, then looked back up. "Your son and his wife are still in the house. Legally, you can request that they vacate once escrow closes. But for your sake and to avoid any scene, we'll time it cleanly. I'll call a realtor I trust, discreet professional. Clara Jensen. She's good at staying invisible." I agreed. Thomas pulled a pale blue sheet from his drawer and started jotting down steps, clean, exact, the way a builder sketches a frame before laying the beams. 1. Verify title registration and make sure no fraudulent filings exist. 2. Notify Atlantic First Bank that the trustee opposes any refinance without written consent. 3. Schedule an independent valuation, private, no listing. 4. Contact vetted buyers, only people with liquidity and verified portfolios. No open houses. 5. Draft a purchase agreement requiring vacant possession at closing with movers scheduled on standby. He looked up. "Any preferences for where the proceeds go?" I hesitated. "I don't need all of it. Just enough to finish what's left of my life. The rest, I want it to fund something for the elderly who've been mistreated by their families." Thomas didn't smile. He just wrote it down neatly along the margin. "We'll discuss that when the frame stands," he said softly. "Today, we pour the base." He made a call. A few minutes later, Clara arrived, early 40s, sharp-eyed, dressed in dark gray. She shook my hand firmly, no small talk, no smiles. She asked 3 questions: the property's strengths, its flaws, and how quiet this deal needed to be. "Completely silent," I said, "until the ink's dry." She nodded. "Understood. No leaks, no noise." Within the hour, the plan stood like the skeleton of a new house. Clara would drive to Austin, posing as an insurance appraiser, bringing a technician to check the systems, plausible, clean, unnoticed. No ads, no signs, just private listings to 2 or 3 verified buyers in Dallas and Houston, the kind who didn't haggle or talk. Thomas would handle every signature. All I had to do was wait. He slid a small stack of papers across the desk letters to the bank communication authorizations, trustee declarations. I signed them one by one. My pen didn't shake. Some choices have to be cold to stay upright in the heat. When I finished, Thomas organized the documents into a folder and said, "Tomorrow we begin," Clara added quietly. "If they ask about inspections or remodeling, just nod. Pretend it's routine. Resistance draws eyes." "I've learned silence," I said. When everything was done, Thomas handed me a slim envelope, copies of what I'd signed, and a list of contacts. He placed a hand on my shoulder. Not as comfort, but as solidarity, the kind men share when they've stood near too many collapsing walls. Between now and closing, he said, "Expect a few surprises. A bank call. Maybe another broker fishing around. Maybe even a cop who owes someone a favor. Send them all to me. And one more thing, change the lock on your filing cabinet, not the front door. Don't give them reason to claim trespass." I nodded, committing each detail to memory, like measurements on a beam. Outside, the sun had cleared the horizon. The tin roof of the law office glinted like a blade. I climbed into the truck, set the envelope on the passenger seat, and caught my reflection in the window. An older man, lines deep around his mouth, but eyes still sharp enough to read the fine print. The engine turned over. I pulled away from the curb. Crossing the small bridge out of town, the river caught the sky pale blue, rippling like breath. I could feel my heartbeat slow, steady, deliberate. No shouting, no slammed doors, just paper, ink, and steps taken in order. As I merged onto the highway, the phone buzzed, once a text from Thomas. "Survey begins tomorrow." I switched the phone to silent and set it face down. Heat shimmered off the asphalt, rising like a mirage. Yet inside I felt something cool and still, like the shadow of a wall, perfectly plumb, finally standing where it was meant to be. I kept my hands on the wheel and let the miles open ahead, clean, endless, without a single wasted sound. 3 weeks slipped by, quiet and identical, like pages from the same morning, rewritten by the same hand. I woke before the sun reached the line of trees outside the porch. Boiled water, made coffee, and opened the garage door to let in the dawn air. The smell of dew and metal filled the room. Ethan still left for work at 7 sharp, the sound of his car fading down the street. Madison's voice filled the house, sharp and polished rehearsing lines for whatever new video she was shooting upstairs. Their life rolled forward smooth and glossy. To them, I was background noise, the hum of an old appliance still plugged in but no longer useful. I said little. I smiled when I had to. I spoke only in fragments, a handful of words that kept the peace. Silence became my daily uniform, light enough to wear, heavy enough to feel. Each morning I carried my tools out into the yard, wiped the hammers clean, sharpened the drill bits, checked the dull teeth of the saw. The rhythm calmed me a man, and his tools the only conversation that still made sense. Neighbors passed by and waved, still building something Harlan they'd ask. I nodded. Nancy Lopez stopped by sometimes with pie or bread, her voice soft as the breeze. "You look steadier," she said. "Keep that spirit up." I thanked her, smiled the way old men do when they've long stopped correcting people. But inside my pulse was a clock counting backward. Every thud in my chest was one day closer. Madison grew busier. She rearranged the living room chasing light. White curtains, new sofa, a ring light glowing like a second sun. I could hear her laughter bounce against the walls. The clack of her heels between takes her voice sweet and hollow, preaching about gratitude and the art of living well. Ethan's voice was different, louder, inflated. He bragged about his new SUV, the real estate deal north of Dallas, the clients he was closing. Some nights I'd hear him on the phone pacing across the living room saying, "This house, this is all me, my work, my success." I'd keep polishing the same hammer, listening to each word hit the floor like a dropped nail, sharp at first, then nothing. One afternoon, the rain came gentle, steady, tapping the tin roof of the garage like an old metronome. I sat with a newspaper when headlights cut across the wet glass. A silver SUV stopped by the gate. Clara Jensen stepped out, beige coat, dark hair, tied back clipboard, tucked under her arm. Her movements were measured, her eyes taking in the house like an architect studying cracks. I opened the door. "Insurance evaluation," she said quietly. I nodded, and she stepped inside. We walked the house together. Clara measured walls, photographed corners, traced her fingers along baseboards. Every motion was precise, silent, efficient. Madison was upstairs, filming laughter, echoing faintly. Ethan hadn't come home yet. Clara wrote notes with the kind of focus you could mistake for prayer. Her voice barely above a whisper. "This wood's still good." "Solid work." I said I keep it that way. We reached the back porch. The rain had turned to mist, soft and silver. Clara zipped her folder closed. "It won't take long now. Once escrow's signed, I'll handle the rest." I nodded. She slipped the file into a waterproof bag, offered one last look of quiet confidence, then walked back to her car. The SUV started without a sound and vanished down the road like it had never stopped. I went back through the house. Madison was still in front of her phone camera, smiling wide, her face haloed in light. I caught a glimpse of the screen, her words about happiness and gratitude flowing smoothly, every gesture perfect for an audience she'd never meet. Behind her stood the wooden wall I built 20 years ago, grain lines still visible beneath the new paint. I paused for a moment, the sound of her laughter filling the space between us, then turned and walked downstairs. That night, the house was quiet except for the rain dripping off the gutters. I opened the envelope Thomas had mailed from Greenville. Inside were the escrow papers printed crisp and clean, the kind of pages that carry weight even before the ink touches them. The small desk lamp cast a soft glow across the words. Everything was clear, the clauses, the transfer terms, the dates. No gaps, no noise. I read slowly, the way a man might read a letter from his younger self. Then I picked up the pen. The ink spread, slightly bled and dried. My signature steady and final. I sealed the documents inside a larger envelope, pressed the flap tight, and wrote in neat, deliberate letters to Thomas Reynolds, private. I sat for a moment staring at the handwriting. Every letter looked like a beam fitted into place, the rebuilding of something invisible. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air smelled of wet soil and faint gasoline. Streetlights shimmered on the slick asphalt. Upstairs, music played Madison, thanking her followers, Ethan's laughter mingling with the sound of glass clinking. Their voices reached me as if from another world, distant, harmless. I went back to the garage, opened the tool chest, slipped the envelope into the deepest drawer, and set a small metal box of nails on top. My fingers brushed the cold steel before closing it. The light reflected softly on the table. Each document I'd signed, each word I'd read, it was a brick. A quiet brick. I was building again, not a home this time, but a kind of freedom that only silence could hold steady. The next morning came clean and ordinary. I woke at the same hour, brewed coffee, greeted the neighbors. Ethan drove off. Madison began another video. Nothing seemed different, but I could feel it. The garden glistened with leftover rain. The earth beneath my boots felt alive, moving, settling. Somewhere under that soil, unseen but certain, everything had already begun to shift. A house was leaving their hands, returning one quiet inch at a time to where it truly belonged. That afternoon, Ethan's phone rang loud enough to rattle the quiet. I was on the back porch, coffee in hand, the smell of rain still lingering on the wood. Through the glass door, I saw his posture stiffen, his voice changing from confident to sharp within seconds. He was talking to someone from Atlantic First Bank, repeating the word impossible until his voice broke into silence. Then anger took over. From where I sat, I could see the veins rise on his forearm, his jaw working hard against itself. Madison appeared at the top of the stairs, phone in one hand, laptop in the other, her lip gloss still catching light. "What happened?" she asked too quickly, the kind of question that isn't meant to calm but to confirm a fear. Ethan hung up and threw the phone onto the couch. "The refinance got rejected," he said, voice-sharp words cutting through the air. "Title ownership mismatch. They said the trustee didn't sign." For a moment, no one spoke. Then his eyes turned toward Madison, hard, accusing. She stepped back half a pace, clutching the laptop to her chest. "It's probably a system error," she said, trying to sound calm. "I'll resend the legal email." Her fingers shook over the keyboard, scrolling through folders, trying to find control in the noise. But the screen betrayed her notification after notification, its brand names she depended on, all carrying the same cold phrasing. Paused. Under review. No longer aligned with values. The old video, the garage clip, had resurfaced. Comments were pouring in. Again, angry faces, capital letters, hashtags demanding accountability. Madison pressed her palms together, whispered fast, like praying to an algorithm. "It's all a misunderstanding. They don't know the context." Ethan wasn't listening. He kept muttering, "Real owner, real signature," as if the words themselves could make reality bend. I set the coffee cup down on the porch rail and walked inside through the back door. Madison was still typing apologies into her phone, voice breaking between breaths. Ethan turned when he heard my steps. The look he gave me wasn't that of a son seeing his father. It was the look of a man realizing his power had limits. His voice came low, tight. "What did you do?" I stopped a few feet away, close enough to see the sweat on his temple. "Nothing," I said evenly. "I just kept what was already mine." Ethan's laugh came short and bitter. "Don't talk in circles. The bank mentioned a trustee. A trust. A signature." Madison stepped in, her voice rising with panic. "Maybe the law office froze the process. It's just a missing verification." I looked at her once and she knew. She looked away quickly, searching for somewhere to rest her eyes. Ethan moved closer, his breath sharp. "You're trying to ruin this for me, aren't you?" I shook my head. "No. I just believe things should stay as written. If the papers say this house requires my signature, then you can understand why the bank refused. I didn't wait for him to answer. I turned my hand, brushing the old paint on the doorway, the place where Ellen used to lean on summer afternoons. Behind me, Madison began to cry, fingers clattering over the keyboard like rain on tin. Ethan was already on another call, his voice rising again, angrier this time. The afternoon stretched thin, soft, and gray. The smell of cut grass drifted in through the open window. I sat in the garage, laying my tools out, one by one, hammer, wrench, screwdriver, the way a craftsman studies his blueprints before building something final. Above me, footsteps crossed and recrossed the floorboards. Doors opened, slammed shut. A spoon clattered in the sink. Madison rummaged through drawers, calling someone, probably her manager, insisting that the audience didn't understand, that the brand should take her side. Then came silence, thick and uneasy, the kind that settles when contracts are about to be canceled. There was a knock at the side door. Nancy Lopez stood there, no pie this time, just a folded newspaper in her hand. She didn't step in. "It's in the paper," she said softly. On page 2, a small article about online outrage toward family prank videos that blur the line between humor and humiliation. No names, just questions. "People are talking," she whispered. "Are you all right?" I nodded. "I'm fine." She squeezed my hand once, then left slowly, as if afraid to disturb the fragile quiet hanging around the house. By dusk, the kitchen lights flickered on upstairs. The smell of garlic and sauce drifted down the hall, domestic and unreal, like a scene from a life that used to be mine. Ethan appeared at the top of the stairs, the light cutting across his face. "Are you going to transfer signature rights or not?" he asked. "No," I said. He exhaled hard through his nose, turned away, his shoulders tight, as if holding back something that could shatter him. Back in the garage, my phone buzzed on the workbench. A message from Thomas. "It's ready." Then a call. His voice was calm, professional. "The buyer's signed. Earnest money's in escrow. Name's George Patel, software engineer. Wife's a teacher. Clean finances, fast verification." Clara handled the last round. "Everything's filed at the county office. Closing date October 15th, 2024. The refinance is dead. The bank's been notified." I didn't answer right away. Outside wind moved through the oak trees, dry leaves scraping against the siding like whispers. Thomas stayed silent, the kind of silence that comes from men who've seen too many endings to fill them with words. Then he said, "Now we just prepare for the transfer." And them I asked. "They have no legal claim," he said, "but for safety I'll have movers and witnesses present on the day." "No surprises." "Thank you," I said quietly. The words felt heavy, like setting a crossbeam in place. When I hung up, the garage was warm with yellow light. The bulb above me crackled softly, cooling. I looked at Ellen's picture on the shelf. Her eyes still held the same calm they always did. "The foundation's held," I whispered. "Now it's just the walls that need coming down." Upstairs, no more laughter, no more recording. The last sound was the click of Ethan's office door locking, a dull, meaningless strike of metal on wood. I rose, adjusted my jacket, and folded Thomas's letter neatly before placing it in the drawer. The house was dark now, the hallway faintly blue. A family photo hung crooked on the wall, tilted slightly, like memory trying to balance itself. I straightened it with my fingertips. The nail creaked softly against the plaster. Everything was aligned again. Dates set. Lines drawn. Outside, the world fell quiet, so quiet, that I could hear the clock ticking forward one deliberate second at a time, a sound as certain as the beginning of a new season. October 15th dawned in silence. The first light slipped through the kitchen window, falling across the tile floor in long silver threads. I woke earlier than usual, brewed coffee, and sat in the garage listening to the faint whistle of wind through the cracks of the old door. The world was still enough that I could hear the drip from the leaky faucet near the corner wall, slow, rhythmic, like a clock that no longer kept time. The clock on the wall read 7:50, 10 minutes until everything began. The sealed envelope sat inside my jacket pocket, its weight small but certain. I touched it once the way a man might check a heartbeat, then took my coffee outside. Ethan had left before sunrise, his car engine fading into the quiet street. Madison was still upstairs rehearsing her brightness, another live stream, another day of pretending. I could hear her pacing, the scrape of curtains pulled open, the click of her camera powering on. Her voice counted down, steady, mechanical, 3, 2, 1, 7:58. Then came the sound, distant at first, then nearer, the low rumble of diesel engines pulling up the street. I set my cup down on the porch rail. 3 white moving trucks turned into the driveway, heavy tires crushing gravel. Doors opened. A crew of men in gray uniforms stepped out, followed by 2 people in crisp shirts, and finally, Clara Jensen. Madison appeared in the doorway, phone in hand, confusion tightening her voice. "Who are you? What's going on?" Clara walked forward, clipboard steady in her hands. Her tone was calm, practiced. "Today is the closing date as outlined in the signed agreement. The property has officially transferred ownership." Madison snatched the paper, scanning the lines, her expression shifting from disbelief to panic. "No," she said. "This is wrong. This is our house." Clara's voice didn't waver. "The documents have been notarized. The trustee's verified signature is on file. Escrow and title transfer are complete." She gestured to the movers. "You can begin." Doors slammed. Boxes slid down metal ramps. The sharp tear of packing tape cut through the air. Madison stumbled backward, trembling, dialing Ethan. I could hear her voice crack. "They're here. They're saying the house is sold. You need to come back now." I stood under the porch eaves, still and silent, watching the moment unfold, like a scene I'd already seen in another life. One of the movers passed me, nodded politely. "Where do we start, sir?" "Living room first," Clara answered before I could. Her voice was even, her eyes on her clipboard. Then quietly to me, "Everything will stay orderly. Don't worry." I nodded. Madison turned back toward me, tears spilling freely now. "You can't do this," she said, clutching my sleeve. "This is our home." I met her eyes, wide, glassy, desperate, and said nothing. Some questions don't need words. Silence answers them better than speech ever could. Wood thudded against wood. The sound of tape ripping filled the air. 2 movers were dismantling the glass cabinet, wrapping the panels in thick blankets, sealing them tight. Madison's voice rose behind them. "Stop! You can't touch that. Those are my things." Clara handed her another document. Tone unchanged. "This is the official handover order. You're free to call legal counsel if you wish." Madison's hand shook. A tear fell on the ink. Her phone rang Ethan. She answered mid-sob. "They're taking everything. They have paperwork, trucks, lawyers. They said you signed, nothing matters." Through the static, Ethan's voice came back sharp and furious. "Keep them out! Don't let anyone in!" Madison shouted back. "I can't!" "They have authorization. They have everything." Clara gave a subtle nod to the team, signaling them to continue. The dining table came next. The house began to empty, piece by piece, a life reduced to inventory. Light poured through the tall windows, landing on the floorboards, where Ellen's footprints once lived, soft and steady. The smell of sawdust and old varnish mixed with fabric and dust, the scent of departure. One mover held up a framed wedding photo of Ethan and Madison. "Want me to wrap this separately?" he asked. "Put it with the rest," I said quietly. "They'll get it back when it's time." He nodded gentle as he set it in the box. Madison sat against the wall now, hair undone, mascara streaked. Her mouth opened once, twice, but no words came. The sound that escaped her wasn't speech, just exhaustion. I turned to Clara. "The buyer, is he here?" "Mr. Patel's on his way," she said. "An hour out. He'll sign the final confirmation himself." I nodded again. Outside, the sunlight climbed higher, scattering across the grass, throwing bright, ghost-like shapes onto the hardwood floor. Madison was still calling Ethan, voice-breaking, begging him to hurry. I didn't move. With each passing minute, another sound vanished, the familiar creak of the sofa, the tick of the old clock, the dull thud of drawers closing. The air itself grew emptier. Clara crossed the room, whispered, "Everything's on schedule. You can rest if you'd like." I shook my head. "I'll stay." I stood near the corner where Ellen once kept her lavender pot, watching the sunlight touch the window pane, the same light that had shone years ago when we finished painting this very wall. Madison finally looked up at me, voice small and broken. "Why are you doing this? Don't you love us?" I said nothing, though the answer pressed hard against my chest. Love isn't letting someone tear down what you built with your own hands. But I didn't speak. I simply looked toward the window where the light kept widening across the floor. Outside, the third truck started its engine. Movers carried boxes to the driveway. The wheels rolled over gravel in slow rhythm. Clara signed the last set of documents with the transport supervisor. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. The final chair was lifted, the old wooden one where I used to sit and tell Emily stories. Watching it go, I felt something ease inside me, like the house was finally exhaling after holding its breath for too many years. Madison's sobs blended with the scrape of furniture and the rattle of doors. I stepped out onto the porch. The street shimmered under the midday sun. Everything happened cleanly, lawfully, on time, exactly as Thomas and Clara had arranged. On the stone table, my coffee from the morning still sat half full. The surface reflected the clear blue sky, unmoved by the noise behind me. I sat down and listened the soft closing of the final door, the turn of a key in the lock. Then silence. Only the wind remained steady and cool, moving through the empty house like a sigh. And in that stillness, I knew the house was no longer ours. It was free. And so was I. The sound of an engine rose in the distance, low at first, then louder, closer, until it stopped just beyond the driveway. Doors slammed. Footsteps pounded across gravel. The front door burst open. Ethan came in, breathing hard, shirt clinging to his back with sweat. His eyes swept the room, the stripped walls, the empty spaces where furniture once stood, the dust on the floor, where sunlight now fell bare. He shouted Madison's name, his voice raw. The echo came back hollow, bouncing off blank walls. Madison sat in the corner, her eyes swollen, phone dark in her trembling hand. Ethan rushed to her, scanning the room again, words tumbling out like debris. What happened? What the hell is going on? Madison shook her head, sobbing, the words stuck in her throat. I was at the dining table, only one chair left. The glass of water in front of me had gone cold, a faint ring of condensation tracing its base. Ethan turned toward me, his face, red eyes bright with disbelief and fury. You can't do this, he said, voice trembling. This is my house. I looked up at him into the same eyes that once belonged to a 12-year-old boy holding a hammer for the first time. "I slept in your garage," I said quietly. "Now you can sit in your own silence." Ethan slammed his hand on the table. The sound cracked through the room. "You betrayed your own son," he shouted. "You sold everything just to get revenge." I didn't move. When I spoke, my voice was steady, each word placed like a nail driven clean. I didn't sell it for revenge. I cleared out a house that someone turned into a stage. Ethan's jaw flexed, the vein in his neck rising like a wire. He spun toward the doorway and yelled out to the movers in the yard. "Who authorized this? I'm the owner here." Clara Jensen stepped in from the porch, a file in her hand. Her tone was calm but absolute. "Mr. Pierce, the documents are final. Today is closing day. Ownership has transferred." Ethan snatched the folder, eyes darting across the notarized lines, the crisp signatures, the red embossed seals. He turned on Clara. "You tricked me. This is illegal." Clara didn't flinch. She took out her phone. "Mark," she said softly, "you can come in." From the doorway, a tall man in a sheriff's jacket stepped through gray hair at his temples. I recognized him immediately, Mark Turner, one of Ethan's old high school friends. He paused long enough to look at me, then faced Ethan. "What's going on here?" Ethan pointed at me, voice breaking. "My father sold the house without my consent. He's throwing us out. I want to file a report." Mark took the papers from Clara, reading carefully, his finger sliding over the trustee line and the notarized seal. When he finished, he folded the document and spoke slowly, firmly. "It's all legal, Ethan. You don't have any claim here." The words hit harder than any shout could. Ethan staggered half a step back. His mouth opened, but no sound came. He looked around at the empty room, at the pale squares on the wall where pictures once hung, at the faint grooves where the dining table legs had rested, and finally at me. His eyes were red, lost the eyes of a man realizing the ground beneath him no longer belonged to him. Madison began to sob again, her crying loud and uneven, echoing through the hollowed space. Ethan sank into the lone chair, head bowed, fists clenched, trembling, but still not reaching for me. I watched him, not angry anymore, just quiet. A deep, settled quiet, like the sound that comes after a storm's last clap of thunder. Mark turned to Clara. "You handle the rest," he said. "I'll log this as a witnessed transfer." She nodded, signing the final page. The pen made a faint, decisive scratch on the paper. Ethan lifted his head, voice hoarse as gravel. "Where are you going, Dad? Where will you live?" I met his eyes. Somewhere with room to breathe. I stood, pushed the chair back under the table, a simple, precise motion, like a man finishing the last stroke of his workday. I slipped my coat over my shoulder and walked past him. The smell of dustwood and sweat hung in the air, the scent of endings. At the doorway I stopped and turned once. The room was washed in light. Curtains swayed in the breeze. The hinges gave a soft, weary creak, the sound of something exhaling for the first time in years. Mark stepped aside and nodded. Clara tucked the papers into her folder spine, straight face, unreadable. Madison sat slumped against the wall, her hair tangled around her face. Ethan covered his eyes with both hands, his shoulders shaking. I didn't say goodbye. I walked out, and the wind met me like an old friend, warm, bright, carrying the scent of the oak trees. The sunlight hit the driveway, sharp enough to make me squint. Behind me, I heard Mark's low voice to Ethan. "It's over. You should go soon." No answer came. My footsteps echoed on the concrete, soft, deliberate. At the car, Clara asked, "Would you like me to drive you?" I shook my head. No. I'll drive myself, like always. I turned once more. The brick walls stood solid, the paint faded but unbroken. The roof caught the sun and gleamed like new metal. I knew I would never come back. And that was all right. Somewhere inside, something fell, a frame maybe, and then silence. I heard the door close, the sheriff's engine start, and the low hum fade into the wind. I got into my old truck, laid a hand on the steering wheel, the leather warm against my palm, and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, the house shrank piece by piece until it was only color brick shadow light. I thought of Ellen and of what she once said, "Keep your honor. Let go of the hurt." I smiled not out of joy, but of recognition. I had done what she would have understood. The road curved past the oak-lined blocks. Sunlight spread across the roofs like a quiet blessing. The air smelled of tar and wind and the faint sweetness of release. I drove slowly, leaving behind the rumble of trucks and the voices fading into distance. Ahead, the road stretched out long, clean, endless. I knew I'd just crossed the last border of endurance. What waited beyond was silence. And for me, silence had finally become a home no one could ever take away. A week had passed since I left that house behind. The mornings in Wilmington came pale and cold, the sea wrapped in mist, the air sharp with salt. I sat at a small wooden table in the cabin I'd rented by the shore. The old radio on the shelf hummed faintly before a gravelly voice filled the room, the morning broadcast. Then I heard the words that made my hands still around the coffee mug. "The House That Justice Built," a feature by Rachel Stein. Her voice carried through the static calm but weighted. She told the story of a father cast out of his own garage, a man who endured humiliation, stayed silent, and reclaimed his dignity with the only weapon he had left, the law. When she read the line, "Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with noise, only with the quiet scrape of paper as a signature meets the page," I turned off the radio. The sea breeze slipped through the cracked window, lifting the old curtain. The papers on the table fluttered once, then fell still. I took a sip of coffee, cold now, and let the bitterness rest on my tongue. Outside, the waves moved in steady rhythm, like a heart still beating somewhere far away. At my age, there's no triumph left, only a kind of stillness, the rare, fragile kind that feels almost undeserved. News of Ethan and Madison spread faster than I expected. In Asheville, Ethan's company released a brief statement. Employment terminated due to ethical misconduct and falsified credit documentation. Cold words, sharp. They showed up in every local business column. Madison became a trending topic on social media. The old videos resurfaced, the ones filled with laughter and shine. But now those same laughs were replayed as evidence of cruelty. The brands dropped her one by one, contracts canceled, clips, deleted sponsorships erased. I heard they left the house quietly loading their last boxes into the night. They rented a small apartment in Charlotte, third floor of an aging brick complex, paint peeling the train tracks just 2 blocks away. Each night the freight trains rattled the windows and shook the wooden floor. Madison no longer filmed. Ethan stayed up late calling lawyers, but every door stayed closed. Thomas told me later that not a single firm would take their case. The trust deed was airtight, perfectly executed. No loopholes, no errors. One young attorney, he said, even told Ethan directly, the law can't save a man who signed his name for greed. Those who once called him friend now avoided his eyes. His emails went unanswered. Madison had grown thinner. The light she once lived for, the lens, the attention now frightened her. They argued late into the night, their voices breaking into the sound of glass shattering, a metallic echo sliding down the hallway of a place too small for pride. Nancy Lopez visited Emily on a Saturday afternoon. She called me later, her voice trembling as she described what she'd seen. The apartment was dim, the windows stained with soot. The kitchen smelled of takeout and cold coffee. Madison sat curled up on the sofa, her hands covering her face. Ethan stood near the door, staring out without speaking. Emily was in the corner, clutching her old stuffed bear, her eyes wide and clear, untouched by all that noise. When Nancy told Ethan she'd take the girl for the weekend, he just nodded, saying he had things to fix. Nancy didn't reply. She simply reached into her bag, took out a brown envelope Thomas had given her, and handed it to Emily. "Your grandfather wanted you to have this," she said softly. That afternoon in Charlotte, the sky burned gold. In her aunt's backyard, sunlight filtered through the oak branches, painting thin stripes across the wooden steps. Emily sat there, legs folded, the envelope in her lap. She opened it carefully. Inside was my letter, written by hand on cream paper ink, slightly faded, the smell of sea salt still clinging to it. "Keep your heart warm, Emily," I'd written. "Don't let it turn cold like that house. Some places are built from wood and brick. Others are built from kindness. Choose the latter to live in. People may take your things, your chair, even your home, but they can't take your compassion if you hold it with both hands." Nancy said. Emily read it quietly, her lips moving without sound. Then she folded it, rested it on her knees, and whispered, "Did it hurt him to leave?" Her aunt only smoothed the girl's hair, saying nothing. The wind moved through the yard, lifting one corner of the paper so it brushed against her cheek. The first tear rolled down small, bright, and weightless. Then she smiled and whispered, "He didn't lose anything. He still has me." When Nancy told me that part, something caught in my throat. That night, I sat by the window of my cabin, watching the black water breathe under the moon. The surf rolled in soft, steady murmurs, like someone whispering from the other side of time. I thought of the letter of the ink, the tremor in my hand as I wrote it, and I understood. Even when houses fall, there are still shelters left standing, built not of wood or stone, but of love. The next morning, the Carolina Herald published another piece, Rachel Stein again. An interview. She wrote, "Harlan Pierce never spoke of revenge. He spoke of honor. And in his silence, the entire state heard what shouting never could." I read that line 3 times. Then I folded the paper and set it aside. The cabin was quiet, except for the pulse of the tide. I picked up my mug and stepped onto the porch. The air smelled of salt and pine. The sky was pale blue, and far out over the water, a single bird circled once before vanishing into the horizon. For the first time, I felt peace, not because I'd won, but because I'd learned how to be still in the sound of justice carried by the sea. 3 months later, the Wilmington coast stretched before me, an endless mirror of blue. The waves still came steady, the sand still unrolled into the horizon, but people had changed. I lived in a small cabin a few miles outside town. The wooden roof had faded to gray, but it held firm. The floorboards carried the faint scent of pine resin, a smell that met the morning air like an old memory. Each dawn I rose before the fog lifted from the sea, boiled water, brewed coffee, and listened to the wind move through the tall pines behind the cabin. The smell of coffee mixed with salt air, warm and quiet, the way Ellen used to smell when she stood by the shore, her hair lifted by the wind. Most mornings I worked. I patched the roof, replaced a few warped planks. My hands trembled more these days, but they still knew the weight of a hammer, still remembered balance. When I worked, I thought of the early days in Asheville of Ellen handing me nails, of the sound of saws and laughter. Even after all these years, the rhythm returned. Outside the porch, a row of lavender had begun to grow from seeds Thomas sent from Greenville. They hadn't bloomed yet, but the faint sweetness had already spread into the wind, delicate and clean. By late afternoon, I would carry my chair down to the sand and sit facing the water. Fishing boats drifted back toward the harbor. The sun sank behind the horizon, laying long ribbons of copper light across the surface. Each evening, I placed Ellen's photograph on the small table beside me. In it, she was smiling, hair tied neatly, holding a bundle of lavender we'd picked one summer in 2015. I touched the glass. "Ellen," I said softly, "I kept my word. The house belongs now to someone who knows how to honor it." Thomas still called from time to time. Together, we'd finished setting up the Elder Dignity Fund, a small foundation based in Greenville for seniors who'd suffered abuse or had their assets taken from them. I'd sent almost all the money from the house sale into it, keeping only enough to live simply. Thomas told me once, "You've done what most only dream of doing." But I didn't do it to prove anything. I did it to end a loop, the one where kindness keeps getting mistaken for weakness. That evening, Rachel Stein called from her newsroom. Her voice carried a kind of warmth I hadn't heard since the story broke. She said the article had been reprinted statewide, that letters had come in from readers who said they saw their own fathers in my story. I told her, "If they remember their fathers, then your piece did exactly what it should." There was a pause. Then she said quietly, "You've made people believe in justice again." When the call ended, I sat watching the sea. Justice, I thought, never needed to shout. It only needed to be true. The wind picked up and I rose to walk the shoreline. The sand was cool under my feet, the waves curling and retreating, leaving their brief prints on the coast. I remembered Ethan's first words when he'd told me to valve into the garage. "We just need our own space." Now I had mine, a space as wide as the horizon. I thought of Madison, her laughter in front of the camera. I thought of Emily's voice asking why I didn't sit at the head of the table. All of it had drifted away the way foam disappears into the tide, bright, momentary, and gone. Some still call me cruel. But cruelty isn't always in the act. Sometimes it's in the ease with which people trample the ones who built their ground. I didn't destroy anything. I simply restored order. And in that order I found silence again. As the sun fell lower, I went back to the porch. The air had cooled, and the light took on that soft, late glow that makes everything look like forgiveness. On the table lay a letter from Emily. The handwriting was small, the ink faint, the words uneven. "I still keep your letter. Grandpa." I read it every night. I read that line again and again, and somehow it warmed me more than the coffee beside it. There are messages that travel farther than voices, truths passed on, without ever needing sound. I looked out toward the sea, listening to the rhythm of the tide striking the rocks. In those waves, I could almost hear Ellen's voice again. Justice doesn't have to be loud, Har. It just has to be real. They told me to sleep in the garage. I sold that mansion and walked away quietly. Because sometimes silence isn't surrender, it's freedom. I stood and walked slowly along the shore. The wind came off the water, cool and salt-heavy, brushing against my shoulders. In the distance, Wilmington's lights began to shimmer, a constellation of small gold dots scattered across a violet sky. I smiled and kept walking. The sand shifted softly beneath my feet. Each step felt like a farewell, not bitter, not regretful, just the calm release of someone who finally understood that everything, even respect, has its price. Thank you for listening to my story. And if you believe that respect cannot be bought, share this story. Let the quiet justice of one father be heard, so that other homes might remember how to keep their foundations of kindness before it's too late.